Okay, so now we're going to talk about cover crops and mulches and composts a little bit. First thing we're going to talk about is cover crops, obviously, because that's first in line. What is a cover crop, you may ask? A cover crop is a lot like the trap crop we discussed previously, and this is really just some sort of like fodder crop we grow to basically keep the soil occupied, to keep it vegetated, and maybe in some instances to throw off a pest or to incorporate more nutrients. Like some legumes will bring nitrogen into the system. Some others, even some legumes, are what are called what are they called? Nutrient miners. I forget the beneficial accumulators. That's it. So these things will some of them are tap rooted, some just have really long fibrous root systems. They will go down and they'll pull up stuff like manganese and iron and molybdenum and plant nutrients, and they will mine them from the lower soil profile, and they'll kind of breathe them up into the plant tissues. And then when you kill the plants, they become available at the soil surface where most plant roots are, and so therefore you kind of bring more nutrients and make them available to the plant, whether it's nitrogen or any of those other micronutrients that get mined out. So there's a lot of different cover crops. Basically, you know, anything can be a cover crop, depending on how you use it. Some really common ones are oats and rye and vetch. There's several kinds of vetches. They all different uses in different climates and stuff. Here, I forget its hairy vetch or something like that. That's the one that grows around here. It brings in about 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre, which is pretty good. That's a lot. 50. You can't expect to get exactly 50 though. It's probably about between 30 and 65 or something like that. You'll get somewhere in there. But still, that's a lot of nitrogen you're bringing. Alfalfa is a pretty common cover crop. The different clovers. Red clover is a pretty popular one for perennial systems, but red clover brings in about 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre, where sweet clover, for example, brings in about 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Different clovers will bring in different insects, different times of year, different pollinators and stuff. Same with all the different cover crops, all the different possible crops. They all have different kind of things they're really good at. Like superheroes, some are bulletproof and super strong, and some can see through walls, and some can cause storms to happen, and some can light on fire. It's just like that. They have their different kind of nuance to them, and so kind of thinking of what your system is, what crop was there before, what crop's going to be there after, even after that, looking into your rotation and saying, well, geez, a nitrogen boost would be pretty freaking sweet right now. So maybe I'll grow like a red clover. I'll do a red clover in there and I could increase my soil organic matter a little bit. So I'll do oats, and I'm gonna put it in about late August or September. This is perfect. I don't have to kill them. I can just the oats will winter kill, and the red clover, I can just mow it down real good and then plant into it in the spring. And I'm gonna be planting corn or something. And the way I have everything set up, the corn will come up before the clover will, and it will just outcompete it pretty much. And so think about your cover crop and how your cover crop interacts with your main crops, and not just now, but way into the future, and looking into the past too. So nitrogen's a big one. I mean, nitrogen is often the limiting nutrient, and so knowing that you had a couple of really high demand crops, high nitrogen demand crops coming up to this open space you're going to have here is an indicator that you should grow a legume for a cover crop. So that's just an example. You can use beneficial accumulators. You can say I'm going to leave it fallow next year, and right next to it I'm going to have a really diverse garden. The other side of that's the orchard. So why not bring in some beneficial insectary type, attract all the pollinators and keep them there. That'd be like their little hideout, their mansion or whatever. And So you can do that all over the place in all kinds of different ways. But that's a cover crop. Within cover crops, there's several types of cover crops. There's trap crops, like we talked about, which are there just to really grab nutrients from, keep them from reaching too far down into the profile. Then there's green manures, which are grown specifically to be killed and incorporated or killed and left on the plant surface. And that's really the two different kinds of cover crops. And there's just regular cover crops, which are just there to keep the soil vegetated. It's also important to keep in mind the carbon to nitrogen ratio when you're looking at cover crops and those sorts of things. A good example of this would be oats. So you're going to grow perennials. You're growing this crop for perennial in a perennial system. Instead of cutting the oats and killing them when they're 6-8 inches tall and really green, really high in nitrogen, wait till they're about to go to seed or starting to get ready to go to seed. Their carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be drastically different. A lot more carbons per nitrogen in that later life cycle. It'll be kind of lignifying almost. So that it'll be a totally different carbon to nitrogen ratio at that point. And so kind of paying attention to that for when you're going to incorporate or kill your cover crop is important. When killing cover crops, it's important to know the most effective way. Some of them you have to herbicide just the Jesus out of them. You got to throw down way too much Roundup to kill this stuff. Or you can try mowing it down, and depending when you mow it, maybe mowing it's good enough to kill it. Or you can flood it out, or you can smother it, or you can roll over it with like a roller chopper or something. But one example of knowing how to kill your crop is a mix of hairy vetch and rye. It's a really common mix. It's very popular. It's a great mix. But vetch by itself will kind of fold over a mat and kind of intermesh with itself on the soil surface or just slightly above it, But when it's grown with rye, because the rye goes straight up, the vetch has to grow straight up to compete for light and stuff, and to get pollinated. The flowers have to get up higher. So that means they're growing up. Or in this situation, they're kind of down all over the place. You try to cut these, and you're going to cut the tops out. You're not going to really necessarily mow them where they get cut off at the soil surface. Well, in that rye mix with the vetch, they're sitting straight up. So you could run through there with a scythe or just a regular mower, and poof, they get cut off at the most weakest, vulnerable point, their Achilles heel, and killing it is much more effective. So that's just one little hint. Let's talk about mulches, all right? So mulch is just pretty much anything laying on the soil surface. It could be compost, it could be chunks of old car tires, it could be hay, it could be wood chips, it could be leaves, it could be a sheet of plastic. It could be you, maybe, if you lay there long enough. But what do mulches do? That's a good question. Mulches are multifunctional. They provide insect habitat, they provide small mammal habitat, amphibian habitat. They're a source of nutrients. They are a source of organic matter. They moderate soil temperature and moisture. They decrease erosion and decrease compaction. They can even alleviate compaction in some instances. They decrease plant competition. They increase good root habitat. And they decrease disease incidence. So mulches, they are permaculture. Permaculture and mulches are pretty well aligned, because they're both very multifunctional, multi-purpose. Nothing's really a waste in these systems. So mulch is going to be your friend. You're going to really get to know mulch well. And we talked about this little diagram earlier. This purple business would be a mulch in this situation. This small stuff would be too, but this is like aged mulch, and that's like a fresh mulch. Okay. So let's talk about, we kind of talked about carbon to nitrogen ratios with the different cover crops and when to kill your crop. Well, mulches kind of have the same thing. You need to know your carbon to nitrogen ratio of your mulch, depending on how you're going to use it. If you're going to use it just as a soil covering, you want something with a really high carbon to nitrogen ratio, like 400 plus. Hardwood wood chips are about 400. They'll be really slow to decay. sitting on top of the surface. Like it'll take 4 or 5 years for these chips to totally disappear. At least 4 or 5 years. Um, but something with a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, for example, like grass clippings. So you had a bunch of grass clippings you saved all summer, and then you mulch this fall with them. They're going to break down by the next year probably. Leaves are the same way. So knowing your carbon to nitrogen ratio and your goals and your outcomes you want to see are very important. Yes, the mulch isn't just a mulch. It depends on how you want your mulch to function, and a lot more thought needs to go into it if you're really going to put your time and effort and invest in mulch like this.